Well, welcome everyone to the Terry Talks Nutrition Educational Webinar Series. We are doing a two-part webinar series today with Dr. KP Khalsa and Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, and it is on finding fibromyalgia relief. Now, these two videos should be played simultaneously. You can watch one or the other first because we are getting two unique perspectives here on how to find relief from fibromyalgia. So today we are going to be talking with Dr. KP Khalsa. He is an Ayurvedic doctor. He is also a nutritionist, licensed massage therapist, registered herbalist. He pretty much does it all. He is one of the country's foremost natural healing experts with over 47 years of experience in alternative medicine. He is also a president emeritus of the American Herbalist Guild and a current board member of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. He incorporates a very thorough knowledge of multiple healing modalities, including Ayurveda, Western, and traditional Chinese medicine. He also has a school called the International Integrative Educational Institute, and he has been training professional Ayurvedic practitioners, nutritional therapists, and herbalists for over 30 years. He is the only American to hold the title Yogara in Ayurveda and the first person to be dual credentialed in both herbalism and also Ayurveda. So welcome, KP, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. Well, it's very much my pleasure to be here and my pleasure to talk about fibromyalgia because that's such a prevalent condition and makes people so miserable, but we know that there are some great things you can do to help people make strides and resolve their disease. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into this topic then. I wrote a textbook on fibromyalgia, and if you're interested in that textbook, you can contact me through my website. I'll give you that information a little later. But I've been wading deeply in these waters for a long, long time. So fibromyalgia, very complicated, difficult condition to deal with. Dr. Teitelbaum, in his presentation, talked about the definition of fibromyalgia, what it is, what it includes, the symptoms, those various other issues that are concerned with fibromyalgia. So I'm going to focus on treatment techniques and mainly herbal treatment techniques. Again, Dr. Teitelbaum mentioned a few here and there, so I'm not going to be redundant with those things. We'll mention a few other things that are non-herbal and talk about my approach to fibromyalgia. Dr. Teitelbaum and I actually met many years ago just from being in the fibromyalgia world, and I was reading his books and we were talking, and we knew a lot of the same people. And it turned out that he had developed a very comprehensive protocol, as had I, and so we had followed parallel paths for quite some time. The question about what it's like to have fibromyalgia, I guess, is answered differently from every single person that does have it, but one way or another it's miserable, and for some people it's more miserable than others. But here's what one person said, a close colleague of ours, Chantal Cabrera, who is also a professional herbalist. Chantal wrote an excellent book about fibromyalgia, which I would very much recommend, but my body feels like it's screaming, and you're not quite sick enough to be sick, and so sick that everybody can recognize that you're sick, but you're definitely sick enough to be miserable every day, and it goes all the way from people who are sort of somewhat achy and tired but manage to kind of push through their life one way or another to people who are completely disabled by it. But both Dr. Teitelbaum and I have been treating it for decades, have found that there are many things we can do to help people get well from that. So let's take a look at what this integrated management would be all about. We're both going to talk about very similar things because we discovered the same things work. We need to have a holistic protocol, and it's important to understand that many people have actually been cured. I've talked to dozens or hundreds, certainly, of people who are completely well from fibromyalgia, including the person who I quoted earlier, Chantal Cabrera. One of the important things also for people that have this illness to understand is that just because they have pain, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't move, and that's very challenging for people. Again, that was addressed more in Dr. T's presentation, but it's really important to move. Sleep is critical. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then lifestyle support in every way. There's no drug you can take for it. It probably has many multiple causes. It is a syndrome, and syndrome just means a bunch of symptoms that come together in consistent ways, and there's no underlying pathology or lab tests or anything to diagnose it. So you have to approach it from every angle possible, and that means having to do with stress and sleep and diet, all these things we're going to talk about. We also both found that multidisciplinary therapies dealing with the whole person were important, and that we had to handle things in an integrated, gradual way and focus on the pace of improvement. It's going to be a slow process. There is no dramatically immediate kind of thing. And of course, people have seen many, many doctors. The length of time between initial presentation and diagnosis is usually something like 12 years, so people are very frustrated, and they want something that works now because they're tired and achy, and they want some changes, but unfortunately it is incremental. This is an idea from Ayurveda that I just want to present to you, that Ayurveda would use oily therapies in general. Fibromyalgia is a condition of people that have cold, dry, insufficient bodies with underfunctioning digestion, and that goes along with insomnia and pain, and all these things come together as a package from the Ayurvedic perspective. Ayurveda would use oily therapies in general to treat that across the board. And if you know this Ayurvedic terminology, that combination of symptoms and physiology is called vata. So these are anti-vata therapies. So that would be in your diet. People would be encouraged to eat oily food to their ability to digest it. Oily massage, oily enemas. And just to understand that oily massage is a great thing to do, and it's going to be good constitutionally and in a holistic overall way for people. But when I was writing my book, I interviewed hundreds of patients, and every single one of them, well, maybe not everyone, but a good share mentioned that massage therapy was the one thing that gave them the most relief, but it was very short term, and that was very consistent, that they said if they sort of wanted to buy a day, they could have a $100 massage and feel great for the rest of the day, but then they wake up feeling better. By the end of the next day, they'd be back to their symptoms. So fibromyalgia is a disease that manifests as musculoskeletal pain, and people are inclined to think that if they just found the right way to rub people, or the right spots to press or something like that, or the right points to needle, that it should be able to be handled. But it's a disease of the nervous system, which again Dr. T is talking about in his presentation. So massage is not the ultimate way to treat it, even though sort of intuitively it seems like it might be. We need to treat the nervous system. If we are going to use oily therapies, and we're going to use things topically, again from Ayurveda, an excellent preparation to consider is a type of infused oil that it contains probably 50 herbs called Narayan oil. I called it the icy hot of Ayurveda. I used to call it the Bengay of Ayurveda until I realized nobody remembered what Bengay was anymore. But it does have sort of a warming, cooling kind of effect, and it helps with pain, helps people feel better, and it helps to get at the underlying neurological issues that are the root of fibromyalgia. So using this topically often helps people both short-term and long-term. Anyway, it's worth looking into, and it's easily available in the health marketplace. These are the ingredients. If you're familiar with these, you can take a look at these various ones. Before we dive into all the specifics of the treatments, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to treat fibromyalgia and to go through this process. You're looking at many months to recover. I usually suggest to people who have had it kind of the typical medium amount, you know, they were diagnosed 10 years ago, something like that. That's a lot of what we see. But it's going to take a good solid year to get back to feeling, you know, pretty normal, pretty decent, and maybe a couple of years to really feel like yourself again. And even then, people tend to feel a little bit fragile. Our colleague Chanchal Cabrera, who I quoted earlier, says that she's many years past recovery now, but she says she's at about 90%, which is pretty good, and she just feels a little extra fragile. And so you probably are never going to get back to the 100% robust person that you were before, but for most people, 90% is perfectly adequate, and you can't push yourself hard like you used to, but that's how you got sick in the first place. So you need to expect relapses. I always tell people that they should exercise or just be active to half of their capacity. If you think you could walk to the mailbox, only walk half the way to the mailbox. If it worked great, the next day walk 3/4 of the way to the mailbox. But rather than sort of spending the energy while you have it, which is what everybody wants to do, save it instead. Put it in a savings account and use half your energy that you think it might take. That way you're not going to end up having a crisis and a relapse. However, I've realized that for people who've had no energy and have been in pain for a long time, when they have a good day, they do want to spend it, and so they are going to have relapses, and everybody just tells me, look, I understand what you're saying, but I just can't stand it. I have to spend the energy when it's in my pocket because I never know when I'm going to get back again. There's a phenomenon in fibromyalgia that's sort of euphemistically called pain behavior, which just means that you're so expecting that to have pain that you're unwilling to do things that will sort of push you to the place where you might have it. So your entire project for the day might be to get up off the couch and make a sandwich, and that's as much energy as you have for the day. Well, that's pain behavior. You're afraid that if you do too much, it's going to hurt. And that term pain behavior is a little bit pejorative, but the idea is to live a life as reasonably fulfilling as you can without hurting yourself and pushing yourself. People also, of course, need psychological support, and it's difficult when you have an invisible disease that causes you to be disabled and not participate in kinds of things that people want to participate in with you. Well, while Dr. T was developing his SHINE approach, I was developing my THRIVE approach, and this is not necessarily in the order of priority, it's just in the order because that way it can spell thrive. Touch, as I said, is not the most important thing for most people, although it is beneficial for most people. And then as we go through the other ones, we'll touch on some of these. Again, I'm going to focus mainly on herbal medicine today. So using this THRIVE approach, a holistic approach, we can get to some real nice stages of cure and people feeling a lot better. Let's talk a little bit about the R, which stands for rest, rebalance, and sleep. And really here I mean sleep, but I couldn't spell thrive with S, so rest, rebalance, and sleep. The key point in fibromyalgia is if you have fatigue that's not resolved by resting, and as you know from our discussions, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are the same disease, and depending on the doctor you see, they will give one diagnosis or the other, but it all involves this widespread pain and fatigue that's not resolved by resting. Well, if you have a disease that if you go to Tahiti and lie on the sand in the sun for 2 weeks and you're still tired every morning, then you have chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. So we need to help you sleep, and I think that this disorder is primarily a sleep deficit disorder, and my #1 priority is to get people to sleep by any means necessary. So if that takes a drug, great. Now, drugs don't help you sleep in a restful way, but at least they give you some rest, and ideally we'd like to use other things. So let's talk about a few of those. Sleep is absolutely critical here, and when I speak to groups of people about fibromyalgia, I'll be speaking to an auditorium of 1,000 people, and I'll say, how many people wake up precisely at 3 a.m. and can't go back to sleep? Every hand goes up. So there's something about this that causes this cyclic lack of sleep issues. They usually can't get to sleep very well. By the time they do, then they wake up this 3 a.m. thing, and I want you to sleep right straight through. So primarily a sleep disorder and non-refreshing sleep. You're exhausted and yet you have insomnia, which our ancestors would have said was impossible, but here we are, waking at 3 as we said. Normal sleep has 5 stages. And first, you have the alpha, which is a chatty mind. You're thinking about what went on during the day. Then you go unconscious, but you're not really resting yet. Then you go into delta, which is where you repair and replace damages to your tissue. And then the deep delta is where you do deep detoxification, cellular detoxification. And then you rise back up to have some REM time for dreams. And you go through the cycle of delta to REM. The place that's missing in fibromyalgia is the 2 delta stages where you take out the waste material and then rebuild the tissues, and so the tissues end up getting damaged and not repaired, and you end up with micro damage to the tissues, which just continues to manifest year after year until you have drastic damage to those tissues, which accounts for a good share of the pain that we see in fibromyalgia. So if we can get you down into delta, that's going to benefit your healing, and then all those healing hormones, growth hormone and such, are involved. So the body doesn't repair the cells, and we have that sleep disturbance. And it's not necessarily about pain, but people often also do not sleep very well because of having pain. So it's the most critical factor in recovery, so I want to talk about that first. Sleep long and deep every single night, very long, very deep, and bank sleep. People often say, well, you know, if I could just get 6 hours, I'd be so happy. That's not what I want. I want 12 hours or longer per night. When I tell people, I want you to sleep 14 hours every night without fail, they look at me like I'm nuts. First off, I can't do that. Second off, why would you want to do that? And third, my children or my job or something doesn't allow that. But I'm absolutely serious. These people have sleep deficit going back decades sometimes, and they owe themselves thousands of hours of sleep to get back to recovery. So banking sleep, 12 hours or more per night or longer would be ideal. If you can function on 8 hours, then the extra 4 hours gives you time to repair all those tissues, but difficulty falling asleep. 5-HTP is an amino acid produced in your body from tryptophan, which is a common amino acid in our food. It's available as a dietary supplement. You take it at bedtime, gradually increase the dose until you get to the dose that allows you to fall right to sleep at bedtime, usually somewhere between 200 and 400 milligrams right at bedtime. Tryptophan, the amino acid that is in your food, is also available as a supplement. It's a sedating amino acid, and that's about 10 times less potent than the 5-HTP. So you can take somewhere between 500, 2,000. That's not an absolute limit by any means. So people take 3, 4, 5,000 milligrams at bedtime. That's then converted in your body to the 5-HTP, then converted to serotonin, a mood-stabilizing neurotransmitter, and then melatonin, which is the hormone that allows you to fall asleep. So it has benefit all the way around. Either tryptophan or 5-HTP is likely to be effective, and you can try the one that works best. How about some herbs for sleep? Well, Dr. T mentioned several, so I'm not going to repeat the ones he talked about, but I'll just add to the mix here. This herb, Yejiaotong, is a Chinese herb that's very well known in Chinese medicine, but not very well known to the American public. It's the stem of an herb that is much more commonly used, the root, which is called Husha Wu, a long-term, slow-acting stamina tonic, kind of a ginseng-like herb. But here we're going to be using the stem of the vine rather than the root. This is one of the main, if not the main, sleep-inducing herbs in Chinese medicine. It acts fast, so you can take it right at bedtime. Really well tolerated. People find it to be very comfortable. You could make a tea out of it and then drink that tea at bedtime. And the typical dose is about 15 grams. So you'd weigh out 15 grams of the chunky root, cook it up, drink that at bedtime. 15 minutes later, you're asleep. Very likely to work quite well. And for those of you that have tried, 10 other different things from valerian to lemon balm to lavender, I think you're going to find this one to be a bit more punchy. So give it a try. This is what it's going to look like when you buy it, these chunks from the Chinese herb store. Boil it up as tea, drink it at bedtime. Well, talking about punchy, going up the list even further, we find nutmeg, which is one of the most successful sleep-inducing remedies in our bag of tricks, and often it's the final answer that really will put people to sleep. It's a powerful herb, so I'm suggesting it sort of cautiously, but if you use it carefully, it should be fine. You may have heard some sort of exaggerated concerns about nutmeg and the things it may do. It's a little bit psychoactive, but really it's just a great sedative. So we're going to use the ground up nut, which is the herb here we see in the center of this fruit, and take that for sleep. So it's a dried kernel of seed, and a typical dose is somewhere in the range of 1 to 5 grams. It would be pretty unusual to use more than 5 grams. Now the tricky part of this is that it has about a 4-hour delay from the time you take it. So if you want to go to bed at 10, you have to take it at 6. You can't take it later because you got the 5-hour delay. You can't forget and take it at bedtime. It gives you a good solid 8 hours of sedating action, and then you wake up. You can set your watch by it. So you have to take it at 6 if you want to get up at 6, because it'll give you the 8 hours. So you take the nutmeg nut, grind it to powder, and consume the 1 to 5 grams. All right, briefly let's talk about the touch part of Thrive protocol here, and that would be massage and body work. So I said that it was the most mentioned beneficial therapy. Many people say that if they get it about twice a week, that's sort of, they get a couple days of pain vacation, that's enough of them to sort of make it through their week. But it gets expensive. That's $1,000 a month right there for 2 massages a week. It doesn't cure fibromyalgia by any means. That wasn't the problem. But it does help the lack of oxygen in the musculature. It gives some temporary benefit. Immunity is very important. There's a sort of a viral and a non-viral version of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And some people have these viral infections that were the sort of precipitating event for the whole thing. Some do, some don't. It's, again, a very broad spectrum disease. There are many causes, and I'm not going back into that because Dr. Teitelbaum focused more on that. But if you do have an acute infection, we have to get rid of that before we can make any progress. So people have all kinds of herpes viruses, shingles, cold and flu virus of various kinds, and if your body is too busy fighting those and it just can't ever get over the hump, you're just grinding away, just trying to keep the acute viruses at bay, we're not going to make progress. So we have to treat the acute illness first. So some of these may be infectious in origin, that is, you actually have a virus that's causing your disease, but we can't get to that until we pump up your immune system enough to get through the haze of the initial thing. So some percentage of cases were triggered by this immune episode, and then as the immune system is suppressed, people end up with these so-called opportunistic infections that can be bladder infections, sinus infections, infections in your gut, cold and flu. They can be bacterial, fungal, yeast, virus, and that's a big topic. But to take a look at that one way or another, we have to handle it. So an example of something that might give you broad spectrum benefit is echinacea. We use that to treat acute conditions, and that's something that you take short term to be able to suppress many different kinds of infections. It works by temporarily increasing white cell production, so it helps your body to gobble up virus, bacteria, and numerous other kinds of pathogens. So that's just one other thing to consider. Now, when we get to the actual long-term virus for someone that has a virally induced fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, there's a combination of two herbs that I discovered about, probably 30, 35 years ago that never would have been combined in the history of humanity today, but due to our modern systems of communication and transportation, we now know that they work synergistically. And this is black walnut hull. So it's used to treat these chronic fatigue viruses. We don't really know what these viruses are, and we don't know if they're actual specific viruses. I mentioned herpes before because it seems that herpes is likely candidate, many herpes species, for being the thing that caused this original disease. I was just talking to someone recently who's sort of semi-disabled by fibromyalgia, and I've been mentioning, as a person I know socially, and I was just saying, boy, your symptoms sure indicate that you have a virally induced disease, because she has the type of fibromyalgia where she had a flu that never went away. That's real typical. Doing great until you all of a sudden get something that seems like kind of a extra aggressive flu, and then you just never get better. Like Chanchal said, you feel like you have the flu every day forever. Anyway, so I said, has anyone ever talked to you about viruses? Well, she's had the disease for 10 years. No one's ever mentioned viruses. And I said that you could request a herpes panel from your doctor. I did a herpes panel, and she had sky-high levels on 3 herpes viruses. So we often see that. Herpes seems to be either a fellow traveler or very much part of the whole complex. Anyway, black walnut hull can help kill these in ways that we don't frankly understand very well, but it sure works well. So for this viral version of chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, we can use that in combination with gum benzoin, which is a resin that exudes out of some trees in Sumatra in Indonesia. So here we have a European fruit, the black walnut, and gum benzoin, this sap from a little tree in Indonesia, and it turned out that they're synergistic. So when you buy the black walnut in the herb marketplace, it's going to look like this. And I'm going to suggest that the dose is probably around 8 grams. And you can work up to that dose and see how it goes. And usually we use equal parts of the gum benzoin. And here I said 6 grams, but somewhere in that neighborhood, 6, 7, 8 grams of each. And it doesn't. You experiment with it to find the combination that works the best for you. This is available powdered, and so you could get that powdered as well and mix it with the other. And then you just juggle the doses. That's going to take you a month or so to dial in the dose of each that allows you to feel the best. But basically, they have no side effects. They're relatively available, and you just take the dose that allows you to feel the best. And usually, every month, people feel a bit better until they get to a place of about maybe 6 months where they're feeling pretty good, and their symptoms are largely resolved if you have this viral type of the disease. And you gradually reduce the dose incrementally over the next 6 months or so. So we deal with the chronic, with the acute immune burden, and then we have to deal with the chronic immune burden. And then we're going to handle that is these slow-acting, long-term adaptogens or tonic herbs. Other kinds of things like bowel probiotics and antifungal therapy might be beneficial, but one way or another, once we've conquered the current bugs, we have to get after the bugs that are keeping you sick. On to vitamins and nutrition, obviously critically important. I just wanted to mention vitamin D. It's definitely the hero of the new millennium, and I would say that vitamin D and our new knowledge of it has transformed my practice more than any other technique I've ever learned in 47 years. Amazing results by getting vitamin D up to where it should be, and we had no idea about this until just the last decade or even maybe the last 5 years. In the science, vitamin D has been very much associated with brain health, which is what we're talking about here, of course, and we'd like the blood level to be about 75 nanograms per milliliter. It's a very simple test. You can get a test online, or you can ask your doctor to order the test, and if it's anywhere lower than that, you want to supplement until you get up to that level, and that seems to be the sweet spot where you get optimal benefit for immune function and nerve function health all the way around. It also has a strong association with pain syndrome, so much so that our modern new understanding of vitamin D started with some patients that had intractable pain that wasn't responding to anything and couldn't be diagnosed as anything else, and just to see what would happen, they were given high doses of vitamin D and they all recovered. So now we know how important it is, and vitamin D is the most researched substance in history, including all drugs and all nutrients, and we find that somewhere around 95% of Americans are deficient, so we want to get it up to 75 in the blood. It's a very interesting theory that fibromyalgia may be a vitamin D deficiency. I don't think that it's only a vitamin D deficiency, but I do think vitamin D is part of the mix, because there's a very direct geographical correlation between fibromyalgia and vitamin D level in the blood, and vitamin D comes from the sun. So in sunny countries like around the equator, South America, there's almost no fibromyalgia, and it starts to increase gradually, and as you get up into the polar regions, it has the highest levels. So you see high levels in northern British Isles, Scandinavia, of course the northern United States, Canada, that kind of thing. On to exercise. Again, Dr. T was focused a bit more on this, so I'll just sort of lend my opinion that it's absolutely critical. But I talked to someone the other day who was feeling a little bit better from her fibromyalgia and thought, well, I'm going to go to exercise class. And she went to a yoga class, and she bought an expensive leotard and went in there, and after 5 minutes, she was completely whipped. And she left and never went back. And I said, well, what's the deal? And she said, it was just so embarrassing. I couldn't, only for 5 minutes I could handle it. And I, of course, wanted to reassure her that that's how you do it. You go there for 3 minutes. You tell the teacher that, you're not going to be capable of doing everything everybody else does. You lie down and relax. Too bad what other people think. Or you leave, and the next day you stay for 4 minutes, and you work your way into it. That's what it's all about. You're not going to do a full-blown jazzercise class the first time out of your apartment. Okay, so this is mainly what I wanted to focus on for you, is to talk about various herbs that we could use for numerous benefits here. And we talked earlier about tonic herbs, adaptogens, immune enhancers, and here's a long list of various herbs from all the big three natural healing systems that you could consider using. But one way or another, using these slow-acting stamina and immune enhancers, adaptogens or tonics we would call them. And frankly, this is the core of getting well with fibromyalgia, is to use these things. If you find the right combination of these kinds of slow-acting herbs, ginseng, hoshowu, codonopsis, eleuthero, these various herbs that we've talked about, and take them in considerable doses over an extended period of time, almost everybody gets well regardless. And then you do some basic things like, eat a good diet and do some exercise. So let's take a look at a few of these. Ashwagandha, very, very well-known herb from Ayurveda. It's an herb that you could use on a regular basis. Now, this is not very feelable when you take it, so you have to take substantial amounts over an extended period of time. Astragalus, we think of, this is from Chinese medicine, we think of astragalus as being a cold and flu herb here, but that's really a new idea that we kind of came up with here. It's considered to be a tonic herb in Chinese medicine. It's in the same chapter in the textbook as ginseng. It's a minor tonic. So it's used for long-term stamina enhancing and hormone balance. Amla as well from Ayurveda is another similar remedy. If you're interested in a very famous formula based on amla, Chyawanprash is a medicinal jelly that has all those properties of all those things we just talked about. In particular, it supports the immune system. It's anti-inflammatory. The amla fruit we just looked at is one of the top anti-inflammatory substances on planet Earth. It wins, it's in the top 5 in every study of inflammation. And that's made into a jelly, and then it has 42 other ingredients, herbal and food type ingredients, and you can eat it on a cracker like this guy is here or right off the spoon. So I have included some handouts for you, and I'll give you the link for those a little later here, but you could go to some of those sources and find the Chyawanprash. Here's an example of something a Chinese grandma might put together. This is a soup mix with half a dozen assorted tonic herbs, and you can see the ones that they are here, that you would use to cook up the broth or the basis of a stew or some kind of a soup or a bean dish. And you could just use that casually in your food on a regular basis to support this stamina. Huperzia is a moss from Chinese medicine, and it has been known to be a brain and nerve and mood memory enhancer in Chinese medicine for centuries, but it's a little bit kind of slightly toxic, so the dose was always limited, and the scientists took a look at it and said, can we separate the toxic constituents from the beneficial constituents, and they discovered that they could. So they extracted from this moss huperzine A, which was the active ingredient, and that's now available as a supplement, extremely beneficial. This benefits almost everybody who takes it for almost any reason because it gives the brain an opportunity to produce a whole bunch of neurotransmitters, mainly acetylcholine, which is the main neurotransmitter that helps you create and retrieve memories. So huperzine crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is what we need, and a typical dose there would be 50 to 400 micrograms. You could go a little higher. Micrograms. This is a very potent substance, very tiny doses, but it's very easily available, and so many people have told me that this just transformed their life. It was just like the veil that was between them and the real world was just pulled away, and they now could sort of experience the world with their full senses and good memory and good cognition. And so for fibrophobia is the main thing we're going to use it for here. So very selective for acetylcholine, as I mentioned. So here I said cautiously increase the dose to 800 micrograms. This supplement, huperzine A, can produce a little bit of nausea at higher doses, and so most people are fine up to 400. You could probably push right up to that over a few days. If everything felt good, I would take, maybe another couple, 3 weeks to very slowly work the day up to our next level. So watching the nausea. All right, so pain, that's what we're here to talk about. Salicylates are the category of constituents that aspirin originally came from, and of course in the drug world we call those non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs NSAIDs, but it turns out many plants have them. Willow bark, that was the original one that aspirin came from, but it turns out to work very, very well used in the plant way, and you can just get this bark and cook it up, and I'm going to recommend a dose of about 30 grams. You get that chunky bark like we see here, and cook that up as tea, weigh out 30 grams of it, drink that, and it's about like taking a few aspirin. It works quite quickly, 10-15 minutes like aspirin, and of course it treats pain, fever, and inflammation, all things that you might want to use it for. But it's a very good short-acting pain reliever for people with these kinds of conditions, and it has essentially no side effects. Meadowsweet is another plant completely unrelated to willow bark, but it turns out it also contains salicylates. It's actually used as a gastrointestinal herb, so it's really easy on the tummy. And this is commonly available as tincture, and you could use that tincture at the dose that gave you the best pain relief, much like you would with the willow bark. This is meadowsweet. This is a European herb, and it's now available in bulk from some herb suppliers. Again, look at the handouts that I'm going to tell you about in a second. all meadow sweet. You can use this as a tea as well if you use substantial doses. Substances that have natural opioid compounds in them are very good for treating pain, and these are particularly good for fibromyalgia because, again, it's cold, dry people with a fragile metabolism that get this disorder, and so usually warming remedies are the best for them, and all these opioid-containing plants are mildly warming. They warm you up a little bit, enhance circulation a little bit, promote digestion a little bit, plus having the opioid-type pain release. So California poppy is one. We use the entire above-ground portion of the plant, and about 30 grams is typical as tea. So that will come dried and it's chopped up, and then you just cook the tea out of it. Corydalis is a close relative of these other plants, and it's the main pain relief remedy in Chinese medicine. We're going to use the root in this case, and you're going to cook that up as tea. So again, about 30 grams. Now, I can't guarantee that any of these are going to taste great, but they're tolerable enough that it's worth using them. I see hundreds of people using them. So this is the Corydalis root, a distant cousin to poppies. When you buy it from the Chinese herb supplier, it's going to look like this, chopped into these flakes. You weigh out 30 grams, cook it up. Also, it's available in a couple of other forms that you might be interested in. There's a pill in the Chinese herb world called Great Corydalis tea pills. It's basically just the same thing in the form of little pills. That works well. And then recently, these 10-to-1 concentrates have been available, and you can get that on Amazon. Corydalis root that's been concentrated 10 times, so you only have to take 1/10 as much, and you can take capsules rather than take the tea. All of them tend to work pretty well. You can try them and find out if any of them work for you. And then, of course, poppy seeds. So this is the actual seed of the opium poppy. It's the same plant that those drugs like morphine are made from, but the amounts in the seeds are very tiny. It's completely legal. And again, you just cook that up and use that in your food or as tea. 30 grams, again, would be typical. 30 grams, when you're measuring out poppy seeds, is 4 tablespoons. So 4 tablespoons of poppy seeds. Cook that up as tea, drink the tea. 15 minutes later, you're sleepy and the pain has been resolved. Devil's claw, an herb from South Africa. And this has a completely different set of constituents. It's widely used for musculoskeletal pain in Europe. So it has a long history there and easily available. It's been studied fairly significantly scientifically, and it works pretty well. It's called devil's claw because the seed pod has these devilish-looking claws, but that's not actually the part that we use. We use the root. So this is the seed pod. That's, again, the name, but the root. So the roots will look like this. They're sliced and dried in the sun, and then they ground to powder, and that's the stuff you use, and you take it internally in pill form. Beta-sitosterol might be the active ingredient. This is a hormone-like substance that plants make for their own purposes, but it has a structure very similar to our steroid hormones, to cortisol. So that's one theory. The thing is that probably half of the plants that we deal with, flowering plants out there in the world, have beta-sitosterol, and they certainly all don't act like devil's claw. So that doesn't seem too likely, but it's possible that it has this cortisol-like substance. It also has a few other contenders for its active ingredients. Cayenne, as it turns out, can treat pain very effectively, and not because of the heat, but because it contains a substance called capsaicin that, when you take it internally, blocks the transmission of substance P in your nerves. P for pain, substance P. It's a pain signal generator. So when you take enough cayenne, you get enough capsaicin saturated throughout your entire body. It takes a while to do that, maybe 2 weeks at a high dose of cayenne to get enough capsaicin in your tissues that it's penetrated the nerves and suppresses the substance P, but it can work extremely well, very, very well. It just shuts down the pain signal. It's a little warming, which is good for most people with fibromyalgia anyway. But of course, there's the problem of your tummy. So you adjust the dose to your digestive tolerance. You take it in divided doses with food, and any chilies that have that hot flavor can do it. That's the stuff, cayenne. It's the hot stuff that's doing the job. Blocks the substance P in the synapse so that it can't be, the nerve signal can't be propagated. It's also available as an ointment, and that'll be called capsaicin ointment. You could get that in the natural remedy world or just from the drugstore, and that is Same idea. The capsaicin penetrates your tissues and eventually goes into the nerves. And again, that may take up to a couple weeks to really work its way in there. So fibromyalgia is a disease of the nervous system. Dr. T talks about the hypothalamus, a part of the brain that, as blowing diffuse. And so we know very much it's associated with the nervous system, not really the muscular system. So we want to treat the nerves themselves. And be aware that when you apply it, it will be a little hot, but it's not the heat that's doing the job. It's the capsaicin penetrating the tissues to get to that substance P. That's what we want. So pain blockage, not the heat. If you're going to use cayenne ointment externally, you want to use a pea-size amount on the affected joint. So if your shoulder is the place that just really is always bothering you, take a piece of cayenne ointment the size of a pea, rub it in, and do that a couple times a day for up to 2 weeks for it to saturate. Then you just do it every day. And it doesn't give immediate relief, remember. It has to saturate the tissues. Well, here's an herb, again, very well known in the Chinese herb world, not so well known here. Dipsacus. Shuduan in Chinese means restore the deficiency, so that's what we want. Fibromyalgia is a disease of deficiency. People lack the nutrients in their tissues that they want. They've been maximally stressed out. Their tissues have been damaged by stress hormones or by virus or these various things. And we want something that will help to rebuild the glandular system, the nerve system, all the tissues that have been damaged. So this is the root of a teasel plant. We have teasels in North America. You've probably seen them, this particular one. So it's just absolutely a standout in joint therapy and traumatic injury. I call it the arnica of Chinese medicine. We'll talk about arnica in a second here. So broad benefit in trauma and pain. A typical dose is about 15 grams a day. You could take that in powder. This easily would grind in your coffee grinder, so you could grind it to powder if you wanted, or you can make it as tea, as would be done in Chinese medicine. It's going to look like this when you get it from the Chinese herb store. And you might be able to find sources where you can buy it already powdered, in which case you could take it that way as well. Speaking of arnica, this is the #1 pain-relieving remedy and tissue-healing remedy in European natural medicine. So this arnica is going to be tinctured, and you've probably heard that arnica is poisonous, which it is, and so it shouldn't be taken internally, which is not true. Arnica was a famous internal medicine over the last few centuries, and we've just gotten very conservative here, and the health food store will say, don't take it internally because they're afraid that you'll have some kind of a problem. But it's even available in the marketplace to be taken internally. Just make sure you get a type that's to be taken internally, and be careful. If you drank this whole bottle, you'd be dead, but a few drops at a time is not a problem. Arnica grows in Europe in mountainous kinds of areas, and it's the flower they're going to be used. So it turns out that it's much less toxic than thought, but still, you have to be careful. So you use a tincture that's a 1 to 10, to say that on the label, and start with 1 drop a day and work your way up. Now, I've given people 100 drops. I've never seen anybody have a toxic side effect. I'm trained in this. I know what the toxic side effects are. I've never seen it, so you should be well safe under 100 drops. So maybe take 20 drops with each meal, something like that. Titrate just means to adjust the dose to your comfort. And you will get a tincture that's produced properly by people that know what they're doing out there in the herb market, and you take a little bit. And understand that if you say anything about taking it internally, the health food store person may correct you, but I'm telling you it's okay within those amounts. It's also applied externally. So these are the signs of overdose, just FYI, but you're not going to see that. Mineral bath therapy is one of the most successful things for fibromyalgia in the entire scientific world. Most of the research on this is done in Israel, and they have people bathe in the Dead Sea. Very, very effective. Israel has the highest rate of PTSD in the known in the world, for reasons you could understand, and so many people develop trauma-related fibromyalgia there. So they have a whole population of people to deal with there, and we don't really know what it is about this mineral bathing. Is it the heat? Is it the magnesium? Is it other minerals? Is it just the fact that you've taken some time off work? Is it the fact that you're communing with other fibromites while you're all in the mineral bath? We don't know, but it's one of the most successful therapies ever studied. So most of the studies show improvements across the board, middle term, short term, in everything, and just a short period of bathing in these mineral baths, people got pain relief for a month, tender point count for a month benefit, global assessment, fatigue, everything, all better all the way around. I know that Dr. T has told you about the study that he was the lead author, and he basically, it was just doing the entire SHINE protocol, and everybody got better. And similar with what I'm talking about, you know, I call mine the Thrive protocol, but it ends up being the same thing basically. And you do all these things and people get better. So this is one more thing that you could do. Balneotherapy, you might hear it called. Very popular in Europe, of course. People spend their whole summer vacation at one of these health bath kind of places. So we don't know exactly why it works, but it certainly is quite effective. So you could try various versions of this. Why not have a vacation at the Dead Sea? 50% magnesium chloride. So it may be magnesium. Dr. T talked about magnesium, so I'm not getting into the details of that, but that along with vitamin D, those two things would be the top suggestions I would have from the nutritional point of view. From Ayurveda, we have the idea of using castor oil topically. You've heard of castor oil as a laxative, I'm sure, but we can use castor oil topically. That's one of those oily therapies that we talked about, but castor oil is the best for rejuvenating the nervous system. It's quite effective, although messy. I was involved in a study with a fibromyalgia support group a few years ago, and we were looking at topical preparations. We had people apply. We had about 10 different topical preparations, and it was a controlled study, and it eventually got published. We had people rub things on their tender points and then rub things, you know, on larger areas, and it was a whole complicated deal. But the bottom line was that we found that a menthol cream, ended up being the most effective across the board, which was surprising to us because, again, most people found it to be cold, but it gave the best pain relief of the whole experience. So cooling sensation. Don't give yourself a full body massage with menthol cream. You're not going to like that. But spot treatments of a shoulder and elbow, you know, wherever these things bother you. And it kind of tricks your nervous system into thinking that you're not having pain there. So ointments that have ice in the name are good choices there. And then you want to look at some hormones just to assess your hormone status. Maybe consider using bioidentical hormones. That's a little complicated for this particular presentation, but I encourage you to investigate that, and that often will make a pretty substantial difference as well. All right, we're getting close to the end here. I wanted to talk about some general joint herbs, and I know that Dr. Teitelbaum mentioned boswellia, and I'm going to mention here a relative of boswellia. Myrrh, boswellia, frankincense are all close relatives, and they're all very similar in their actions. So boswellia is relatively little known in America for humans, but it's really big in dog arthritis. For whatever reason, the veterinary community just really resonated with boswellia, whereas humans have more resonated with myrrh over time. But again, they're close cousins, so you can take myrrh internally. It's an anti-inflammatory and analgesic, and a typical dose would be up to about 10 grams. And that's available as powder, or you could take it in capsules. And you just work your way up to that and find out what works. Giving you a lot of choices here. You're not going to do all of these all at once, but you're going to sort of scientifically work your way into one after another here. These are myrrh trees in the Middle East. So they make a slit in the bark, and the sap oozes out, and you get those blobs of dried sap like we just looked at there. Ginger. It doesn't get much respect here, but definitely worth knowing about for fibromyalgia. Doses have to be high. It's a mild herb, so you want to work your dose up to the maximum dose that gives you the best relief, and you can take it in any form you like, tea, food, capsules, whatever. So it's another warming herb. Again, generally with this disorder, most people feel better with warming remedies, things that enhance circulation, something that if you took a lot of it, you know that has kind of a bite in your mouth and maybe makes you sweat a little bit. Here's another Chinese herb, Noda pterygiae, and going back to that herb, Dipsacus, the Chinese teasel, it's very similar in their actions, and they're often used together. So it has, this one is especially well known for treating pain in the shoulders. So when someone says, I have chronic, unrelenting pain in my shoulders, I have insomnia and fatigue, I know right which herb we need to use, Chinese Noda pterygiae, very famous herb, well known in Chinese medicine. So it's for these kinds of cold joint pains, and it has this affinity for the upper part of the body. So up to about 12 grams, again, as tea. And you don't need to email me when you try the tea and it tastes god-awful horrible, because I've already warned you of that now. Just expect that. But imagine what it would be like not to have shoulder pain. We think of ginkgo as a memory herb in our culture mainly, but here I'm focusing on its benefit for circulation. Many people don't tolerate circulatory herbs that are especially warming. If you start getting into clove and cinnamon and cayenne, they don't feel very comfortable with those. But ginkgo is not a heating herb, and yet it expands the vasculature so that the blood, the warming, healing blood with the nutrients, can get out to your cells. So you might consider ginkgo for that reason. Okay, some more analgesic herbs for your pain. Guggul is the fourth herb in that family of these anti-inflammatory analgesic resins like myrrh and boswellia. Guggul grows in India, and it has very similar kinds of effects. So Guggul is even much more well known as a detoxifying anti-inflammatory joint herb in India than myrrh is, and so you could consider either one. They're very similar. Either one might work. This is the raw straight gum right out of the desert, so it has to be processed a little bit. And here's after it's processed, so-called purified. And this herb is well known in Ayurveda as being one of the deepest detoxifying medicines we can have. And of course, we talked about that lack of sleep and where your body isn't taking out the trash in the middle of the night. So this is often of great benefit to dig deep into those cellular functions and get rid of the waste material that the body hasn't had a chance to get into at night. So this is available also as a standardized extract. It would be standardized to the Guggul sterone, so that can work pretty well. All that scientific doodling tends to cause the herb to be just more expensive and not necessarily work any better, but you could use it, and if it works well, fine. Ayurveda has crafted a collection of herbal formulas using the Guggul as the main herb for a few different uses in medicine. I'll explain a few of them to you here. So Yogaraj Guggul means the Guggul preparation used by the king of the yogis. So that sounds pretty good. It's a long-term formula that you could take for a lifetime. Tridoshik means that just about anybody could take it, but it's especially for Vata, that cold, dry energy we talked about earlier, for people with insomnia, constipation, chronic pain, fibrofog. It just just describes exactly the person with fibromyalgia. So it's a balanced formula that you can take for nerve degeneration, slow acting, half building, half detoxifying. About 4 grams a day would be typical. This is the formula. So it's got it's half Guggul and then half equal parts of 25 other things, and you can take a look at it and study it if you want there. But long-term treatment of muscle pain due to congestion from waste material. And it's often used in conjunction with various topical medicated oils like that Narayan oil that we talked about, or another slight variation, Mahanarayan, as we see here. So that's a good combination. Guggul internally, or Yogaraj Guggul, and then the Mahanarayan externally. These are all fortunately very available to us now. Just in the last year or two, all of a sudden, all this stuff from India has become available, and you can just get it with one click on the internet. Kaishar Guggul is for more inflammatory type conditions. That's what Pitta means. So it's for conditions of high inflammation and high toxicity, and especially in the muscular system. So perfect for what we're talking about here. Very well known for all these kinds of conditions, blood cleanser, etc. But it's very applicable for fibromyalgia. These are the ingredients. Available as pills. Typical dose is about 3 grams a day. And you usually take, anapan just means the thing you take it with, so that could be warm water or warm milk if you tolerate that. Here's the formula. A couple of major pain remedies to talk about here. Major is only just in the eye of the beholder, or the eye of the feeler. I categorize some of these as being major and others as being minor, but it just depends on you how it's going to work. So kava we think of as being mainly an antispasmodic or a relaxant, and it may in fact help you sleep, but it turns out that it's actually quite beneficial for pain. The active ingredients in the kava root are kavalactones, and each molecule for molecule, or gram per gram, the kavalactones are about 1/50th, about 1/50th the potency of morphine. Well, 1/50th doesn't sound like much, but morphine's pretty punchy, so 1/50th the potency of morphine is pretty good, actually, and you can easily take a lot more of the kava. So if you get top quality tincture, you can use that well, or various extracts are available. The typical recommended dose is about 250 milligrams of kava lactones, but in the area where it grows, and indigenous people use it in their healing culture, they sometimes use a dose of 10 times that much. So you could certainly use more, and that's going to be for sleep and spasm and pain. You can make tea out of it. Speaking of tasting bad, this really tastes bad. It tastes like okra mixed with spicy dirt with a little dishwater thrown in. Plus it's spicy and numbs your mouth. So you're not going to drink it for the sake of taste, but it's quite nice for its effects. It goes to work quickly. This is hops, and very well-known herbal medicine from Europe and now North America. But it turns out that there's an extract that's been made from this. It's a proprietary extract from a company that makes, let's call them natural drugs or concentrated herbal medicines. And they made one called Perluxan. It's proprietary, so they won't tell us how they made it or exactly what's in it, but it tends to work pretty well, so I thought I'd talk about it. So a standardized supercritical extract from the hops, and what they've concentrated is alpha acids, which are the active ingredients in the hops. Now, this is not the name of a product. It's the name of the actual extract. So the company that makes the Perluxan then sells it to various other brands. So you can find various brands that have Perluxan made from hops as their active ingredient. But it's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and it's equivalent in the studies to ibuprofen, and none of the tummy problems or blood thinning problems that go along with that. So you could use this pretty freely, and I have a pretty good impression of it. 1,000 milligrams of the hop extract. Perluxan was similar in the studies to a couple tablets of ibuprofen, but much better GI tolerance. So you could probably use a gram of Perluxan with each meal, something like that, and some people find this to be quite nice. It inhibits a whole bunch of various pro-inflammatory chemicals in your body. This combination is a classic Ayurvedic combination, Avipattikar, and the name just means to reverse distress, basically. Vipatti is a bad situation, is opposite, and kar just means to do. So something that does the opposite of a bad situation, in other words, improve your situation. These are the ingredients. We won't go into all these, but this is a classic combination for long-term inflammation control that you might want to consider. I get great results with it. It's really classic in Ayurveda, widely available, well-tolerated. The main active ingredient in there is this herb called nishrot, which you don't see very often in most other formulas. It's definitely around in the Ayurvedic world, but it's not one of the main ones we talk about. But the purpose here is to eliminate inflammatory substances from the small intestine. It's a laxative, purgative resin, but most laxatives that we use work on the large intestine. This one works on the small intestine, so it removes pro-inflammatory substances by way of your digestive tract, and can be quite beneficial, so it's worth a try. It's in the Morning Glory family. These are the actions in the body there. So it treats pain, but pain from inflammation. So this herb, this is the main core herb in that combination of Avipattikar. And it's sometimes that root that we just looked at is cooked into milk for Virechana, is just a laxative action there. So these are all the various things that it's used for. Look at all the great things that it does. But bottom line, it helps to reduce inflammation in the core of your body, so that the rest you don't start an anti-inflammatory, an inflammatory cascade that then ends up in your tissues. So reduces pitta, which is inflammation. Reduces gastritis, again, by pushing that stuff out. So benefits across the board for the conditions we're talking about. 3 to 5 grams twice a day is a pretty good dose. Here's a way to use it for kind of a more short-term, milder anti-inflammatory detoxification. More about these sorts of things in the handouts that I'm going to provide for you. The last one I want to talk about here is Nirgundi. This is a topical remedy in Ayurveda, but it's a close cousin to chasteberry. You've probably heard of chasteberry, very well-known kind of spicy little berry that grows around the Mediterranean, mainly used for PMS and Western herbalism. But Ayurveda likes to use the leaf. So this is a close cousin. This is Vitex negundo. The European version is Vitex agnus castus. This is Vitex negundo, and we use the leaf. It's a warming leaf that's used to treat joint pain in Ayurveda, and lesser known to us here, but a real standout and a really common remedy to use in Ayurveda, and now it's become available to us. You're not going to use the raw plants, I don't think, here, but you can use preparations from the leaves that are easily available for us. So the leaf is analgesic. In India, where the plants are easily available, people would make a poultice and things like that, but it's also available as an oil. So if you just look around for Nirgundi oil, you're going to be able to find it, and that's a body oil topically that's been made of sesame oil usually, but Nirgundi for joint, muscle, and nerve pain. So you apply that topically. So we've talked about several things to apply topically. We've talked about a bunch of things to take internally, short-term, long-term, for a broad spectrum of things for fibromyalgia. And I encourage you to just persevere. If you have fibromyalgia, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Often people are very frustrated. It's taken a long time. It's hard to find anybody who understands it. Dr. Teitelbaum and I both have, talked with thousands of people each and heard this story so many times. It's heartbreaking, and yet there are things that can be done. As you know, Dr. Teitelbaum had it and recovered from that. And I never had fibromyalgia, but I've had thousands of clients with it, and we know that it can be treated. But you have to be persistent and consistent, and you have to work your way through this, and you have to be sort of your own scientist to figure out which of these things are really going to benefit you. But I've given you the tip-top things that I know that are likely to be beneficial over the long term for your condition. Okay, so I prepared a bunch of extra handouts for you. As you know, this webinar will be posted for you to watch as often as you want, so you can go through it and stop and take notes or whatever you want, and then you can go to the handouts that give you greater depth information. Here's the link for those handouts. This is my school, as Lexi mentioned earlier, the International Integrated Educational Institute, and we have a wide variety of programs, all the way from one-night webinars on various topics to multi-year training programs. You can check us out at our link there, and then my personal website. So it's been my pleasure being with you today. I hope that you can tune into some of these ideas and begin to experiment with them, and from the things that both of us have talked about, craft a program for yourself. I was just trying to think what a hybrid name for Thrive and Shine could be, but it sounds pretty good. Both those things sound pretty good. Shine and then thrive. Thrive and you'll shine. Anyway, you can tell that we both came to the same conclusions over decades of working with these things, and so we have kind of an amalgamated approach here that does work very well. So I encourage you to dive into that. All right, folks, thanks very much for being with me today, and I hope to see you out there in the wide world sometime soon. Don't hesitate to email or call if you have questions, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, KP, for sharing your insight and wisdom and helping people really craft a path to wellness that is unique to them, because as you said, everyone's case of fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue is different, and so it will require different treatment approaches and holistic treatments in order to get them there. So if you found this through the YouTube channel, you can look in the comments or in the description, and you will find a link to the handout that KP had mentioned. And there's also a link to watch Dr. Teitelbaum's video if you have not seen that one yet either. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us here at Terry Talks Nutrition. We really appreciate your support in our educational programming, and please go visit KP's website. It is full of fantastic information and articles, classes, workshops. So make sure to check that out as well. And again, we do have all of these webinars available for you on YouTube, so you can listen to them at your leisure, stop and take notes. I know I was frantically taking notes while KP was talking, so I'm sure a lot of you out there are doing the same thing. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and hope to see you at another one of our educational presentations. Have a fantastic rest of your day.